Okay, now we can for sure move to the first speaker this morning. And the first speaker is Dr. Steffen Lange. And Dr. Steffen Lange is an economist who combines quantitative and qualitative empirical research to address sustainability issues. His research focuses on digital transformation, the relationship between economic growth and environmental throughput, rebound effects, and concept for sustainable economies. He's researchers at the Institute for Ecological Economy Research at Humboldt University Berlin, and is also an associated researcher at the Department of Social Ecological Transformation at the Technical University Berlin. Of course, he wrote down many publications in international journals, but also he wrote 2 books, one which is Macroeconomics Without Growth, and the second one is Smart Green World, Making Digitalization Work for Sustainability. Then just welcome Steffen for this first talk. Then Steffen, you have the mic for approximately 25 minutes, and afterwards your presentation, we will have 10 minutes of questions and answers.
All right, thank you. Can you all hear me? Please
Perfect.
Give me some
yes.
sign.
Perfect.
Okay,
perfect.
I see some nodding. That's good to see. I don't know whether you know that, but I actually see you apparently still with masks. I'm sorry about that for you. Okay, nice introduction. Thank you as well for that, and thank you for inviting me. Before I start with my talk on energy consumption and digitalization, I want to get you active as well. And just with 3 questions, I want to start thinking about the relationship between digitalization and energy consumption and climate change. So my first question is, and just raise your hand if you agree. My first question is, do you think we need to, I think it's an easy one. Do you think we need to tackle climate change urgently? Okay, thank you. The second question, I think, is more difficult. The second question is, do you think we need to reduce energy consumption in order to tackle climate change? I repeat that. Do you think we need to reduce energy consumption in order to tackle climate change? And now please raise your hand. This is maybe a bit mixed. I mean, I cannot see everybody, but most hands are up from my perspective. And now comes the important question, I think, for this talk. That is, do you think information and communication technologies, which I call digitalization, do you think digitalization helps at the moment to reduce energy consumption? If you think digitalization helps to reduce energy consumption, please raise your hand. Nobody. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, thank you for that. That gives me a bit of a feeling for the room. And I'm going to start sharing my screen with you now. Oh, I can still see you. That's nice. Okay. So this is the topic of my talk, digitalization and energy consumption, and basically the question that I just asked you as well. And what I'm going to do is I talk about the motivation, then point out the research question as I see it, then look at the empirical relationship between energy consumption and digitalization, and then fourth, go a bit more into the theoretical aspects. So how to explain it, 4 effects, how to explain the relationship between digitalization and energy consumption, and then look at policy implications and conclude. As I was introduced, I published various articles on this aspect. I just want to mention 3 of them. So the first one is the book that was already mentioned. I think that's a good start to read, Smart Green World. And the other ones are 2 publications in peer-reviewed journals. And I think the second one, which appeared in Ecological Economics, is maybe the best one, I would say. And this presentation is pretty much or very much based on it. Not only, but okay. So starting the motivation, and that was basically my first question, is do we need to tackle climate change urgently? And I think this recent this is a graph based on the recent publication by the IPCC, by the International Panel on Climate Change. And here, these are different pathways towards achieving or staying within the 1.5 degree limit. And these different colors represent different probabilities to stay within 1.5 degrees. So the red one is only a 17 probability to do so. And the yellow or the orange one is a 83% probability. And no, but the point that I want to make here is no matter which one you look at, or I mean, I wouldn't look at the 17% one, but if whether you look at the 83% one or 67 or 50%, it's a very radical change. In particular, when you look at the historical trend where the graph starts, you know, the black aspect, CO2 emissions are increasing, and now we need to have this incredible decrease of CO2 emissions very, very fast. So this is, from my perspective, the challenge we are facing regarding climate change, and then we have other problems: biodiversity, soil degradation, etc. And these are all interconnected. I will not go into that. There's a lot of sustainability research going on that. But they are interrelated, and basically solving one problem can improve the other one, but it can also make it more difficult. So anyway, that's the, I think, the challenge. Now, how the discourse is being done, in particular in politics, and I would say also in society, as I read media, etc., is that we have the digital transformation. So that is taking place anyway. So that changes, you know, the way we produce things, that changes the way we communicate. Like right now, I'm sitting in Germany next to the Dutch border, actually not that far away from you, but still I'm not there. So this is a new way of communicating. The hypothesis is digitalization changes everything within the economy, and at the same time, we need the sustainability transformation, like regarding climate change. And now what I at least have been experiencing in the last years a lot is that the hypothesis is that digitalization helps. And it helps a lot. And in particular, when you look at the debates at the European level, and also in regarding the government in Germany, I think those are the two discussions that I really I closely follow. The idea is that digitalization helps a lot, and that it is a key tool set to achieve sustainability goals. Now, what we have been doing so far is look at the past. You know, so when you say, I just take that away again. So when you say digitalization helps a lot, what they actually, well, it can mean two things. One is it is helping a lot from a sustainability perspective, and the other one is it could help a lot. Those are two very different perspectives. And what we've been doing, and I've been doing in my research group for the last couple of years, is look at both. But what I want to first focus on is the reality as we experience it right now. So what has happened so far? And I put this research question not in the manner that I say, okay, is digitalization helping or not? Because that is already answered, as you will see in a minute. What we really try to understand is why digitalization is associated with increasing energy consumption and CO2 emissions. Because it is. That's what all the empirics show us so far. So basically, your answer by not raising your hand has been correct. So first, let's look at the empirical relationship which this research question is based on. And I just make that very, very broadly because I don't have the time to go into detail. But overall, we see that overall energy consumption is positively related to digitalization. And now I think I need to make something very clear. As you will also, I guess, probably Jens Malmudin will talk about later, and a lot of discussions are on, is the question, is energy consumption or electricity consumption by the ICT sector itself increasing or decreasing? So the energy consumption by producing all the products that we, or the devices that we use, by using them and by disposing them, is that in or increasing? That is not the question here. I come from a macro perspective. So I look at the entire economy. And then the question is, when we digitalize throughout economic sectors, does that increase or decrease energy consumption? In other words, countries that have a higher level of digitalization, do they have less energy consumption or more energy consumption? And here, when you look at the empirics, it's clear. Those countries that have a higher level of digitalization have a higher energy consumption. Now, the other empirical question is regarding CO2 emissions, and I mean, that's what we're really interested in. Energy consumption is merely important for CO2 emissions, but we are really interested in climate change. And here we also see that there's a positive relationship between digitalization and CO2 emissions. But, and here comes the interesting aspect, or that maybe some hope, there is a negative relationship when energy consumption is controlled for. So that means when we look, these are statistical approaches that we use there. And when you look at the relationship between digitalization and CO2 emissions, and you control for energy consumption, so you calculate that part, that influence of digitalization on CO2 emissions that is via energy consumption, you try to calculate that out, then digitalization actually reduces CO2 emissions, which in other words means if we have renewable energy, digitalization could play a positive part in the climate change debate. I will come to that again in the end. So now comes really the question that we dived into, or at least in this article that I mentioned. Why is that the case? So why don't we see what many people expected or still expect, I see from the debate, that digitalization is reducing energy consumption? Why don't we see it? Why does it actually increase it? And to answer that question, I first want to explain more in detail what hypotheses there are regarding the relationship. And we did that already a couple of years ago in debates with different stakeholders, with firms, with politicians, with people working in ministries, with people working in NGOs, and we discussed, okay, what's the relationship? And we came up, or these debates led to 4 hypotheses. And the first one is that energy consumption by the ICT sector would decline. So there the argument is that the devices that we use get ever more efficient and fast, and that is a fact, that the devices get very much more efficient, and there the hypothesis was that it would decline. The second one, and I think this one is the most important one still in the debate, is that the use of ICT increases energy efficiency throughout the economy. So now we are not talking about the devices themselves, but we are talking about the application of ICT devices in agriculture. So this is precision farming, or in the energy sector. So this would be, we can move towards a 100% renewable energy sector, or in transport, where we can optimize by using digital tools the flight routes of airplanes, or how cars work, etc., etc. So we have this efficiency hypothesis everywhere. So these are still hypotheses, right? In a minute, I come to whether that's actually the case. So the third one is a negative one, or the third one is one that is supposed to increase energy consumption by digitalization. That is that digitalization leads to economic growth. And if we have more economic growth, ceteris paribus, so taking everything else staying equal, we have an increase in energy consumption. And digitalization is very much set to increase economic growth. And the fourth one is sectoral change. There the hypothesis was, and I think still often is, that digitalization helps to tertiarize. Tertiarizing means we have more services and less goods. And we have seen that actually over the past, that the part of services, the share of services in the economy increases. And as services have lower energy consumption per unit of production or per dollar or per euro, that helps to reduce energy consumption. Okay, so now in a minute, I come to whether these hypotheses hold. Now, I very shortly say how we did it in the paper that I talked about, because we talked about this. I talked about this with the organizers beforehand, and we said, okay, it's also interesting to have a bit of a look how science works in this, but I will keep that short. So what we did is we took a framework from environmental economics. This. So that's the framework. And it basically says, if you look at an economy, the energy consumption in the entire economy depends on the energy intensity. So that's A of each sector. And then on the size of the sector, and that is the share of the sector, S, multiplied by Y, which is the size of the economy. And when you do that, you basically look at each sector and say, okay, this sector is this and this energy intensive and has this and this size, therefore uses this amount of energy, and then you sum it all up. So that's the sum sign, and you sum up all sectors, and then you get the energy consumption of the entire economy of an entire country. What we then did is we extended the framework, and we took the ICT sector out due to reasons to facilitate the analysis. And then we derivated to time. I don't go into detail here, but what we then got is an extension of the formula that relates to the four hypotheses that we just saw. And it very much shows that the four hypotheses can and do reflect the changes, all the changes that can take place in an economy to change energy consumption. So here we have direct effects, efficiency, growth and output, and sectoral change again. So then, based on this analytical framework, we looked at the four different effects again. And what I basically did with colleagues of mine is we looked at existing empirical analyses to understand whether these hypotheses are true. And regarding the first one, it's basically the other way around, or you will probably discuss that in a later session in detail. Again, at least that's what I expect from Jens Malmudin, that you're going to discuss these aspects, is that overall energy consumption of the ICT sector itself has increased. At least most research shows that. There was some contradictory research. And now the question is, of course, okay, why does that take place? Because as I said, we have this immense increase in efficiency. And I think one obvious explanation is that, well, we have this increase in efficiency, but we have an ever increasing amount of devices and of servers, and the size of servers, or the calculative power of servers, etc. So we have a growth of the ICT sector. But in addition, we also have the effect that many digital business models are based on free services. And this means that we actually underestimate the size of the ICT sector because, you know, many services like Google and Facebook, they don't appear that much in monetary terms in how we calculate the size of a sector, because all these things that we do online are not directly being paid for. You know, we pay for it maybe with our data, and we get advertisements and then consume more elsewhere, but we don't directly for a Google search, and we don't pay directly for a Facebook usage with money. Okay, the second one, efficiency, and I think this one is really interesting. Again, I think this is where most of the hopes are in, that digitalization helps to reduce energy consumption. And when you look at the data that exists, the first thing is it's really difficult to find data, and that is related to the aspect that energy efficiency is difficult to it's difficult to actually measure it. That's a whole different story. To measure it on a macroeconomic scale or even a sectoral scale. So what exists are examples. What exists are like examples, for example, are home deliveries, you know, online shopping, is that more energy efficient than going to a shop? What uses more energy? And there, for example, the result is it depends on the circumstances. It very much depends. But when you look at the examples overall, you see often they are positive, but sometimes they are even negative. And you don't see this vast increase in energy efficiency that you see in the debate, that you see in the hopes, in the political reports that say, you know, digitalization increases energy efficiency immensely, so thereby contributes a lot to fighting climate change. I come to the third one, growth and output, and here again it is so the hypothesis is true. Digital innovations, when you look at the empirical findings, or digitalization, do increase economic growth, but less than expected. And what we basically see is that digitalization is a very important, maybe the important type of technological change at the moment, but economic growth is lower than in former periods. And here I talk about in particular high-income countries like Belgium or Germany or many others. And the explanation is that digital innovations do increase labor productivity, and that's a very important aspect of why economies grow, but less than former general purpose technologies. And this is now another term, general purpose technologies. You know, there are many different technologies, but then there are general purpose technologies that are being used in many different instances. And one would be electricity. One would be the combustion engine, and digitalization is said to be another one of these. And electricity, for example, you know, that's many decades ago, was much more relevant in that. Okay, the fourth one, I'm going to make that short due to time, is sectoral change. And there, the point is that, yes, it is true that there are more services related to digitalization, but they do not, or we do not see that they replace industrial or agricultural production, so that they come on top and therefore not really reduce energy consumption. All right, so the result was, and we have that here once in a graph or a picture, and once in the formula, that we have two beneficial and two detrimental effects of energy of digitalization on energy consumption. Energy efficiency and sectoral change do reduce energy consumption. Direct effects, so that's the material base of ICT, and growth and output increase the use of energy. And basically, the two detrimental ones prevail, so they are stronger than the positive ones. which is contrary to the debate as we experienced it, or as with these stakeholders, because they very much focused on the energy efficiency throughout the economy. Coming to policy implications and broadening the perspective again. So I think I make this short again. So what we, and this is a bit tautological, I would say, but still important to say. So the policy implications are that we need to reduce energy, direct effects, the energy consumption of all the devices that we use. We need to reduce them. And I mean, everybody says that. What I think is interesting here is that we don't only that we need to not only look at efficiency, but also sufficiency. So data saving code, longevity of devices, reusing devices, etc. The second one, efficiency throughout the economy. We need to somehow, and I think there are potentials. It's partly true what many people say in the debate. So we need to reap these potentials. We need to actually reap the possibilities of digital tools to increase energy efficiency. And the third one is output growth. And here, and this relates, I mean, I don't know whether you will touch upon that, but this relates to the debate, do we need economic growth? Do we need a green growth strategy or a post-growth strategy? And here, the argument or the policy implication is that we must not focus on increasing labor productivity by using digitalization in order to increase growth, but we need to use the digital tools to increase resource productivity and thereby maybe not increase labor productivity in Europe, in high-income countries. This is the perspective here. And sectoral change, we need to make sure that digital services actually substitute physical goods. Now, from my perspective, the very important insight here, so these four are directions where we need to go. But how do we get there? What are the policies? And I think maybe the most important one is to increase the environmental prices. So if we make carbon emissions more expensive, it becomes a business model to reuse. Here I look at the direct effects, to reuse devices. In agriculture, regarding the second one, in agriculture and mobility, etc., there are incentives for firms to actually use different technologies that increase the energy efficiency. Regarding output growth, again, firms and other actors have the incentive to increase resource productivity rather than labor productivity. And the same goes for sectoral change. So the environmental prices, from my understanding, but then again, I come from an economics perspective, they are very important. And now, again, broadening the perspective regarding the entire debate, here it becomes, I think, very interesting because this claim of environmental prices has been in the sustainability transformation debate for many years, certainly in economics, but also throughout the entire sustainability discussion. So this is nothing new, let's say. And I would say this is nothing new, but it also applies to the case of digitalization, and it changes the perspective a bit. Now, coming to the conclusion, I go more into how should we debate the whole thing, the whole relation between digital transformation and sustainability transformation. And as I said, my experience is that so far, still, certainly in political debates and in media debates, and to some degree also in science, the perspective is that digital innovations should be used for the sustainability transformation. And I think to really get to the point to initiate a sustainability transformation that we need regarding the radical change, as I see it, that we need to fight climate change, we need a different perspective. So instead, the line at the bottom, instead I would argue that we need to initiate the sustainability transformation to facilitate another type of usage of digital innovations or digitalization. So we need to initiate a mobility transformation, and I wasn't able to go into that in detail. You know, we need to, but let me take that as an example. We need to initiate a transformation away from cars towards public transport, and then digital tools can be used to form this different type of mobility system focused on public transport, and it can be used, but only under these circumstances of a general transformation of the sector. And you can argue the same for the energy sector, for the agricultural sector, for the housing sector, all the sectors that are important regarding the sustainability transformation. All right, thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions and comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steffen. And now the paper is open for questions. That if there are questions here in the audience, we have 2 microphones here, one on the left and one on the right. Please raise your hand. Don't be shy. If not, I have maybe one first question for you, Steffen. When you say that you concluded basically that today, at least, digitalization is not decreasing the energy consumption. How could you explain that all of the policies and the political decision at the European level, for example, they try to speed up the digitalization, saying that this is the way to go to, you know, to tackle some of the social issues? How could you explain that? Because there are many, many reports today that showing that there is this strong correlation between the increase of digitalization and also at the same time this the use of resources and energy, that we don't decouple today, at least. I'm not saying that in the future we might, for example, as you concluded, if you change the way that we see digitalization might be a good path. But today, why politics they like to see the increase of the digitalization of all of the different activities, basically? Why?
Well, that's an interesting question. Thank you. So I think there's several layers of answers to that. I think the first one is that in general, there is a lot of hope into technological solutions. And we've seen that in the past also before everybody has been talking about digitalization. You know, there's the hope of technology solving our environmental problems. And I think at the moment, everybody's talking about digitalization. So that is the type of technological change that everybody hopes for. Having said that, I think there's an underlying mechanism that regards the question, why is everybody hoping for technological solutions? And I think underlying that is that this allows to not having to make difficult choices. Because when we say technologies, you know, let's look at energy. I think that's maybe the best example. When you look at the scenarios of climate change, the basic strategy is to have renewable energy and then just substitute the current energy by new energy, by renewable energy, and everything else can stay the same. So we have the same amount of cars, and we have the same amount of housing space, and we eat the same amount of meat. And although meat is a bit of a different story, but you know, everything can stay the same. We just have a technological solution, and that's easy because then you don't have to tell anybody you have to stop producing cars, or you have to stop eating meat, or you have to live in smaller houses. I think that's a lot of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree. Thank you, Steffen. What? Yes. Maybe. And here after David. Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. So you said that we should increase resource productivity rather than labor productivity, and say that increase environmental prices. So do you suggest that we should like shift completely taxation and tax rather energy consumption or resource consumption rather than labor as currently is done?
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, that's the underlying idea. But then, of course, I have to say, I think this makes very much sense from an economics perspective. When you look at reality, it becomes more difficult, and I don't have a final answer to that. But to just maybe exemplify the issue, in Germany, we have almost everybody agrees of the parties that we need a carbon tax, and that's the logic underlying, or the underlying logic is making resource use more expensive, and then one could also reduce the taxes on labor. At the moment, the debate is different. The debate is you have a carbon tax, you make carbon emissions more expensive, you give the money back to the people. That's at least how it is being discussed in German parties. Okay. Then there is the left party that is very much aware of people with small incomes. And they say, no, we cannot do that. We cannot tax carbon because then there will be at least some poor people who lose, even if the money is giving back to the tax revenue of the carbon tax is being given back to the people. There will still be some poor people who suffer because they need to drive with their car to work. So they say we shouldn't have a carbon tax. We just they have a very ambitious climate plan. So they say we need to put a lot of money in public transport. We need to put a lot of money in isolating houses, etc. And that's a social debate. So I think I don't have the final solution how this social aspect can be integrated into the environmental aspect, but I would still argue that we don't get around getting the prices right. So I think this making resource use more expensive and labor cheaper should be part of the solution. But then we need strong social additional policies.
Thank you, Stefan. Maybe the last question?
Yeah, maybe if it's possible to keep it like under 2 minutes.
Sure. Maybe David.
All good.
David,
Thank you.
Oh.
Last question.
Last question, yes, from David, yeah.
Hello, Stefan. Very nice talk. Thank you very much. This is David Boll speaking. I have a question regarding the education. If we assume that today digitalization is not helping, and we should also favor sufficiency, as you propose in your talk, how do you regard the initiatives around higher educations to engage more people in the STEM fields like science, technological, engineering and mathematics? Is it something that would work in the right direction to have more people in that field because it will allow to favor energy efficiency and maybe resource efficiency in the field, or is it full of rebound effects and we might just increase the direct impacts of ICT because of more people engaging in the technological career?
So as far as I understand it, the argument to get more people into those disciplines is because due to the technological change or the overall change that we see and that we think we will see in the future, we just will need more people who have these skills. And I think I don't really know the numbers, I have to say, but I think I would still, I do agree, but I don't think we should put so much emphasis on pushing forward those fields. But I think, from my perspective, there's another maybe more important, maybe less important point being made there, and that is, how are engineers being educated? And to have these debates, to have social debates in these study programs, to have debates on responsibility of people who develop technologies. What type of technologies do we develop? You know, what are they used for? Are they just, you know, do I just develop something that that customers like to use, or do I look at the code and think, okay, now how can I make it more energy efficient, or less energy intensive would be the right term? So my argument regarding this aspect would be, we need a lot more of these social debates or the environmental debates within these disciplines.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan.
I would maybe just add for the pending questions, you can either put them on Teams, there is a channel for that, or just keep them because we will use them when during the collective generation of questions. So please note them, write them down. It will be useful later.
Okay, let's thanks maybe Stefan again. Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefan. And sorry, we have now to leave you and, you know, go to the second speaker of this morning. But thank you very much. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.